Marcus, a 19-year-old who lost everything after the death of his parents, has been living on the streets of Portland for 6 months. When he decides to share his last piece of bread with a child even more in need, he has no idea that this simple act of kindness will set off a chain of extraordinary events. At dawn the next morning, 100 war veteran motorcyclists appear at his door, ready to show that no act of generosity goes unnoticed. A story about how compassion can transform not just one life, but an entire community. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days, and neither had my stomach's angry protests. I pressed my back against the cold concrete wall of the overpass, pulling my torn jacket tighter around my shoulders as another gust of Portland wind cut through the makeshift cardboard shelter I'd built. 6 months. That's how long it had been since I'd called anywhere home. My name is Marcus, and at 19 I'd already learned that life doesn't ask permission before it strips everything away from you. The cancer took Mom first, then Dad couldn't handle the medical bills or the grief, so the bottle took him too. The house went to the bank, the car got repossessed, and suddenly I was just another face in the growing crowd of Portland's forgotten. I reached into my backpack, a beat-up thing I'd found behind a thrift store, and felt around for the paper bag that contained my dinner. One piece of day-old bread from the bakery on Morrison Street. The owner, Mrs. Chen, sometimes left the expired items in a clean bag by the dumpster. She never said anything, but I knew it was intentional. Small mercies in a world that had forgotten how to be merciful. As I unwrapped the bread, the sweet smell made my mouth water. I'd eaten nothing but a shared apple since yesterday morning, courtesy of another homeless guy named Jimmy, who'd found it in someone's lunch trash. My hands shook slightly, not from the cold, but from hunger. The bread felt substantial in my hands, probably enough to quiet the gnawing in my stomach for the night. That's when I heard it. A soft whimpering, barely audible over the constant hum of traffic above. I looked around, squinting through the dim light cast by a distant street lamp. About 20 feet away, huddled behind a shopping cart filled with empty bottles, was a small figure. A kid. I couldn't tell if it was a boy or girl at first. They were wrapped in what looked like an adult-sized coat, far too big, with a hood pulled up. But as I watched, the figure shifted, and I caught sight of a thin face, maybe 8 or 9 years old. The whimpering came again, and I realized they were crying. Without thinking, I stood up. My legs were stiff from sitting in the same position for hours, and I nearly stumbled as I walked over. "Hey," I called softly, not wanting to scare them. "You okay?" The kid looked up, eyes wide with fear. Definitely a boy, with dirt streaks across his cheeks, and the kind of hollow look I recognized in my own reflection. He scrambled backward, pressing against his shopping cart. "It's all right," I said, crouching down to appear less threatening. "I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm Marcus. What's your name?" He stared at me for a long moment before whispering, "Tyler." "Tyler. That's a good name." I glanced at his cart, noticing it was mostly empty except for the bottles. "You hungry, Tyler?" The question seemed to break something in him, and fresh tears started flowing. He nodded, unable to speak. I looked down at the bread in my hands, my stomach clenched, not just from hunger now, but from the decision I knew I had to make. This kid was smaller than me, younger, more vulnerable. If I was barely surviving, how was he managing? "When's the last time you ate?" I asked. 2 days, he whispered. "Maybe 3. I can't remember." 3 days. This kid hadn't eaten in 3 days, and here I was, debating whether to share a single piece of bread. What kind of person had I become? I held out the bread. "Here, take this." Tyler's eyes widened. "But it's yours." "I'll find something else," I lied, trying to sound convincing. "Go on, take it." He reached out tentatively as if expecting me to snatch it away at the last second. When his small fingers closed around the bread, his whole body seemed to sag with relief. "Thank you," he whispered, and immediately began tearing off small pieces, eating slowly like someone who'd learned that eating too fast on an empty stomach could make you sick. I watched him eat, feeling a strange warmth in my chest despite the cold night air. It wasn't the first time I'd been hungry, and it wouldn't be the last, but seeing this kid's face light up as he ate, really ate, probably for the first time in days, made my own empty stomach seem less important. "Where are your parents, Tyler?" I asked gently. His face darkened. "Mom's gone." "Dad," he trailed off, then shook his head. "He's not coming back." The familiar ache of loss hit me. Different circumstances, same result. 2 kids, alone in a city that barely acknowledged their existence. "You got somewhere safe to sleep tonight?" He pointed to a cardboard box behind his cart, partially hidden by an old tarp. It looked like it would collapse if you breathed on it too hard. I made another decision that would probably bite me later. Come on. My spot's more protected from the wind. We can share it. Tyler looked at me with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. Really? Really? But we gotta be quiet. Some of the other people around here, they're not all friendly like Mrs. Chen at the bakery. As we gathered his meager belongings and moved to my slightly better shelter, I couldn't help but think about the irony. Here I was, someone who had nothing, sharing what little I had with someone who had even less. Mum used to say that's what separated humans from animals, the ability to choose compassion even when it cost us something. Tyler curled up in the corner of my cardboard shelter, finally looking peaceful as he finished the last crumbs of bread. Within minutes he was asleep, one small hand still clutched around the paper bag as if protecting it. I sat there in the darkness, listening to his steady breathing and the endless sound of rain. My stomach growled again, reminding me of my own hunger, but somehow it felt different now. Less desperate, more purposeful maybe. I had no idea that this simple act, sharing a piece of day-old bread with a hungry kid, would change everything. No idea that somewhere across the city, wheels were already in motion that would transform not just my life, but Tyler's too. All I knew was that for the first time in months, I'd done something that felt right. I woke to the sound of motorcycle engines. At first, I thought I was dreaming. The rumbling was distant but growing closer, like thunder rolling across the Portland hills. I blinked against the pale morning light filtering through the gaps in my cardboard shelter, my body stiff from another night on concrete. Tyler was still curled up beside me, sleeping more peacefully than I'd seen any homeless person sleep in months. The kid had spent most of the night mumbling in his dreams, but toward dawn he'd finally settled into deep, quiet rest. The motorcycle sounds grew louder. I carefully extracted myself from our shared space, trying not to wake Tyler, and peered out from under the overpass. What I saw made me question whether I was still asleep. Motorcycles, dozens of them, maybe more. They were coming down the access road that led to our little camp under the bridge, their headlights cutting through the early morning mist. But these weren't the kind of bikes you'd expect in this part of town. These were big touring bikes, Harleys mostly, ridden by men in leather vests. My first instinct was fear. Biker gangs didn't usually venture into homeless camps to spread good cheer. I'd heard stories about what happened when the wrong kind of people decided the homeless were cluttering up their territory. "Tyler," I whispered, shaking his shoulder gently. "Tyler, wake up." He stirred, blinking confused eyes. "What's wrong?" "I don't know yet, just stay close to me, okay?" The motorcycles were closer now, close enough that I could see the riders clearly. These weren't young gang members looking for trouble. These were older men, weathered faces, grey beards, some with military patches visible on their vests, and they were heading straight for us. The lead rider, a massive man with a white beard and a black leather vest covered in patches, raised his hand and the entire convoy came to a stop about 50 feet from our shelter. The sudden silence was almost as startling as the noise had been. Tyler pressed against my side, trembling. "Are they gonna hurt us?" "I don't think so," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. The big man dismounted his bike and walked toward us. Up close, I could see he was probably in his 60s, with kind eyes that seemed at odds with his intimidating size. His vest had military patches, Army, Vietnam, Purple Heart. "You Marcus?" he asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. I stood up slowly, positioning myself between him and Tyler. "Yeah, that's me. What do you want?" He smiled, and suddenly, his whole face transformed. "Name's Big Mike. We heard about what you did last night." "What I did?" I was genuinely confused. "I didn't do anything." "That's where you're wrong, son." He gestured back toward the other riders, who were now dismounting their bikes. "You see Mrs. Chen at the bakery on Morrison Street. Her nephew Danny is one of us, rides with the Portland Veterans Motorcycle Club." My heart was pounding. "Mrs. Chen had seen me share the bread with Tyler?" Big Mike continued. "She called Danny last night, told him about a young man who gave away his only meal to a hungry child. Said she's been watching you both for a while, worried sick. Danny called me, and well," he spread his arms wide. "Here we are." I looked past him at the growing crowd of bikers. There had to be at least 100 of them now, all dismounting, all looking our way with expressions that ranged from curious to concerned to something that looked almost like pride. "I still don't understand," I said. "Son, how long you been on the streets?" 6 months. "And in 6 months, how many people you seen share their last meal with a stranger?" I thought about it. In 6 months of sleeping in shelters, under bridges, in doorways, I'd seen people share cigarettes, sometimes information about where to find food or safe places to sleep. But food? Actual food when you were starving? Never. That's what I thought, Big Mike said. See, most of us here, we're veterans. We've been to places where food is scarce, where making the right choice can mean the difference between life and death. We know what it takes to give away your last meal to someone who needs it more. Tyler had crept up beside me, still clutching his empty bread bag. Big Mike noticed him and crouched down to Tyler's eye level. And you must be the young man who received this gift. Tyler nodded, suddenly shy. Well, Tyler, what Marcus did for you last night, that's what we call brotherhood, that's what we call honor. Big Mike stood back up and addressed both of us. Mrs. Chen told us you've both been sleeping rough, that you're just kids trying to survive. That stops today. What do you mean? I asked. Another rider approached, a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and laugh lines around her eyes. I'm Sarah, she said. I run a transitional housing program for homeless youth. We've got beds, hot meals, and programs to help you get back on your feet. My head was spinning. I don't understand. Why are you doing this? Big Mike put a heavy hand on my shoulder. Because, Marcus, in a world that's forgotten how to take care of its own, you remembered. You saw someone in need and you acted. No hesitation, no conditions, just pure human decency. If this part of the story is touching your heart, tell me from which place in the world you're listening to this. Another rider stepped forward, this one younger, maybe in his 30s. I'm Danny, Mrs. Chen's nephew. She's been worried about you boys for weeks. When she saw what happened last night, she knew she had to do something. We all did, added another voice. An older black man with kind eyes and a vest covered in patches. Name's Roosevelt. I was homeless myself once, back in Detroit after I came home from Desert Storm. Know what it's like to be invisible in your own country. Tyler tugged on my sleeve. Marcus, are they really going to help us? I looked around at the sea of faces. Veterans, riders, people who'd lived hard lives and survived them. In each face, I saw something I hadn't seen directed at me in months. Respect. Yeah, buddy, I said, my voice catching slightly. I think they really are. Sarah stepped forward again. We've got hot breakfast waiting at the center, clean clothes, showers. And Marcus, if you're interested, we've got job training programs, GED classes, whatever you need to build a future. I felt tears threatening to spill over. I gave him one piece of bread, I said quietly. One piece of day-old bread. Son, Big Mike said, sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest changes. You reminded all of us why we do what we do. As the sun climbed higher over Portland, painting the morning sky in shades of gold and pink, I realized that everything was about to change. But for the first time in 6 months, I wasn't afraid of change. I was ready for it. The hot shower was the first thing that made me cry. I stood under the streaming water at the Veterans Community Center, watching months of dirt and despair swirl down the drain, and I just lost it. Tyler was in the shower next to mine, and I could hear him laughing, actually laughing, for the first time since I'd met him. When we emerged 20 minutes later, clean clothes were waiting for us. Real clothes, not the donated rags we'd been wearing. Jeans that fit, clean t-shirts, socks without holes. Sarah handed me a towel and smiled. Feel better? Like a different person, I admitted, running my hand through my clean hair. The community center was nothing like the homeless shelters I'd experienced. Instead of rows of cots and the smell of unwashed bodies, this place felt like hope. The walls were painted warm colors. There were actual couches in the common area, and through the windows I could see a garden where some residents were working. Breakfast time, announced Roosevelt, the veteran who'd introduced himself earlier. Hope you boys are hungry. Hungry didn't begin to cover it. When they led us to the dining hall, the smell of bacon, eggs, and fresh coffee nearly knocked me over. But what struck me most wasn't the food. It was the faces around the tables. These weren't the hollow, defeated expressions I'd grown used to seeing in soup kitchens. These people looked alive. Tyler and I sat down with plates piled high with more food than I'd seen in weeks. As I took my first bite of scrambled eggs, Big Mike sat down across from us. So, Marcus, he said, sipping his coffee, tell me about yourself. Before the streets, I mean. It was a question I'd learned to avoid. Talking about before meant acknowledging how far I'd fallen. But something about Mike's direct, honest gaze made me want to answer. I was in high school, I said between bites. On a roll, actually. Was planning to go to Portland State, study engineering. Had it all figured out until... I trailed off. Until life happened, Mike finished gently. What about family? Gone. Both parents. Cancer got mom, grief and alcohol got dad. Lost the house, lost everything. I glanced at Tyler, who was quietly demolishing a stack of pancakes. What about you, buddy? You never told me your story. Tyler's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Mom died in a car accident last year. Dad started using drugs after that. Social services came, but I ran away from the foster home. Didn't want to be split up from Dad, even though he shrugged, the gesture heartbreaking in its casual acceptance of abandonment. Mike nodded thoughtfully. Two young men who've seen too much loss too early, but here's what I want you both to understand. Your stories don't end with what brought you to that overpass. Sarah joined our table, carrying a stack of papers. We've got some options to discuss, she said. Tyler, since you're under 18, we need to work with social services, but I have connections. I think I can place you with a family that specializes in helping kids transition back into stability. Tyler's eyes widened with fear. What about Marcus? I felt my chest tighten. In less than 24 hours, this kid had become important to me in a way I hadn't expected. The thought of losing him felt like another death. That's the beautiful part, Sarah continued. The family I'm thinking of, they're good people. They'd welcome visits, and Marcus, if you're interested, they could use help with some projects around their property. Paid work. Real work, I asked. Real work. Jim and Linda Patterson run a small farm about 30 minutes outside the city. They take in kids who've aged out of the system, help them develop job skills. They've been looking for someone responsible to help with their new workshop program. Roosevelt leaned forward. And there's more. The motorcycle club. We've got connections throughout the city. Union jobs, apprenticeships, educational opportunities. But first, you'd live here, get your feet under you, finish your GED if needed. I looked around the dining hall, watching residents chat over coffee, seeing genuine smiles and hearing real laughter. What's the catch? Big Mike chuckled. Smart kid. There's no catch, but there are expectations. You follow the program rules, you participate in counseling sessions, you contribute to the community here, and Marcus, you keep being the person you were under that bridge. What do you mean? You take care of people. You look out for others who are struggling. You remember what it felt like to have nothing, and you use that to help the next person who finds themselves where you were yesterday. Tyler had been quiet through this whole conversation, but now he spoke up. Will I still see Marcus? Sarah smiled. Absolutely. The Pattersons live close enough that regular visits are definitely possible. And Marcus, if you're interested in the apprenticeship program, you'd be learning skills that could eventually lead to your own business, the kind of stability that could help you be there for Tyler long term. What comes next is even stronger, and to not miss the ending, tap the subscribe button now. It's free and you'll be with me in every new story. I felt something unfamiliar stirring in my chest. Hope, but bigger than that. Purpose, maybe. Why me? I asked. I mean, there are thousands of homeless people in Portland. Why did you choose to help us? Because, Roosevelt said, in our experience, people who give when they have nothing to give, those are the people worth investing in. Those are the people who change communities. Mike nodded. We've all been helped at some point in our lives. Veterans who came home to nothing. People who lost everything through circumstances beyond their control. We know that sometimes all it takes is someone believing in you. Tyler reached over and grabbed my hand. Marcus, I want to try it. I want to have a real home again. Looking at his hopeful face, I realized I'd already made my decision. Okay, I said, let's try it. The next few hours were a whirlwind of paperwork, phone calls, and planning. Sarah coordinated with social services for Tyler's placement, while Roosevelt and Mike outlined the program expectations for me. By afternoon, we'd both been accepted into their respective programs. As the sun began to set, I found myself standing in the center's garden with Tyler, watching him examine the tomato plants with wonder. Marcus, he said quietly, do you think this is real? Do you think it'll last? I thought about Big Mike's words, about the faces around us, about the feeling of clean clothes and a full stomach and something to look forward to tomorrow. I think, I said carefully, that yesterday we learned that good things can happen when you least expect them. Maybe that's going to keep being true. Tyler smiled and went back to examining the plants. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I believed my own words. 3 months later, I was standing in the workshop at Patterson Farm, teaching a group of former homeless teens how to build birdhouses, when my phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. Marcus, you need to see the news. I excused myself from the class and stepped outside, dialing his number. He answered on the first ring, practically shouting with excitement. Turn on Channel 8, we're on TV. What are you talking about? I laughed, but I was already walking toward the farmhouse where Jim and Linda had a television in the kitchen. Mrs. Chen told a reporter about what happened that night under the bridge, about the motorcycle club and everything. My stomach did a little flip. The last 3 months had been the most stable period of my life since my parents died. I'd earned my GED, started an apprenticeship program in carpentry, and was even saving money for the first time in years. The thought of our story becoming public made me nervous. Linda Patterson looked up from where she was preparing dinner. "What's got you all worked up, Marcus?" "Apparently Tyler and I are on the news," I said, still not quite believing it. She grabbed the remote and switched to Channel 8, just as the story was beginning. There was Mrs. Chen standing in front of her bakery speaking to a reporter. "I watched these boys for months," she was saying in her accented English. "The older one, Marcus, he come every day, so polite, never ask for nothing, just take the day-old bread I leave out. But that night, when I see him give his only food to that little one, I know I have to call my nephew Danny." The story cut to footage of the Veterans Motorcycle Club, with Big Mike being interviewed outside their clubhouse. "We've been helping homeless veterans for years," he said, "but when we heard about Marcus, a 19-year-old kid who gave away his last meal to a child he'd just met, we knew we had to act. That's the kind of character you don't find every day." Then the reporter was standing outside the Veterans Community Center, talking about how the motorcycle club had mobilized over 100 riders that morning, how they'd connected Tyler with a loving foster family, and how they'd helped me find housing and job training. "But the story doesn't end there," the reporter continued. "Marcus has used his second chance to pay it forward in ways that are inspiring an entire community." The camera cut to footage I didn't even know had been taken. Me working in the center's garden with current residents, teaching woodworking classes, helping serve meals. Then it showed Tyler at the Patterson farm, working alongside me in the workshop, both of us laughing as we helped a newer resident figure out how to use a drill. "In the 3 months since that night under the bridge," the reporter's voice continued, "Marcus and Tyler have helped the Veterans Community Center expand their youth programs, and Marcus has personally mentored 12 young people transitioning out of homelessness." I stared at the screen, hardly recognizing myself in the confident young man I saw there. When had I stopped looking like a victim and started looking like someone with purpose? The story concluded with recent footage of me and Tyler visiting the overpass where we'd met, this time with a group of volunteers distributing meals and information about available services. From one piece of bread shared in desperation to a community-wide movement of compassion, the reporter concluded. This is what happens when one small act of kindness ripples outward. Linda turned off the TV and looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Marcus, honey, did you know you'd helped that many people?" I honestly hadn't been counting. After my first month at the community center, Roosevelt had asked if I'd be willing to share my story with new arrivals, help them see that there was hope. Then Sarah had asked if I could help with intake interviews, since I understood what people were going through. Then Big Mike had suggested I join them on their weekly outreach rides. Each thing had felt natural, like just doing what needed to be done. But seeing it all laid out like that, "I need to call Tyler," I said. When I reached him, he was practically bouncing with excitement. "Did you see it? Did you see how they showed us helping other people? Jim and Linda recorded it so we can watch it again." "Tyler," I said, sitting down on the porch steps, "do you ever think about that night? About what would have happened if you hadn't shared your bread?" He finished. "Every day. Marcus, I was giving up that night. I was so hungry and so scared and so alone. If you hadn't found me, if you hadn't shown me that there were still good people in the world." He trailed off, but I understood. I'd been close to giving up too, in my own way. Not in the dramatic sense, but in the slow erosion of hope that happens when you're invisible for too long. "The reporter called me this afternoon," Tyler continued. "She wants to do a follow-up story about the kids we've helped, about how the program has grown." It was true. What had started as the motorcycle club helping 2 homeless kids had evolved into something bigger. The Veterans Community Center had expanded their youth services. The Patterson Farm had started a formal program for teaching job skills to former homeless teens. Other motorcycle clubs in nearby cities had started similar outreach programs, and at the center of it all was something as simple as sharing food when you're hungry. My phone rang again. This time it was Big Mike. "You see the news, kid?" "Yeah, I saw it." "Good, because I've got something to tell you. That reporter, she's been getting calls all evening. People wanting to help, wanting to volunteer, wanting to donate. But more than that, other young people sharing their stories, saying they were inspired by what you did." I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, but this time it wasn't fear or hunger. It was something bigger. "Mike, I just shared a piece of bread, that's all." "But son," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice, "that's never been all. That was everything. That was you choosing to see someone else's need as more important than your own comfort. That was you being human when the world had given you every reason not to be. As I hung up the phone, Tyler came running up the driveway, having gotten a ride from his foster parents to come celebrate with me. He threw his arms around me in a hug that would have knocked me over 3 months ago, back when I was weak from hunger and despair. "Marcus," he said, "we did something good, didn't we?" Looking around at the life we'd built, the stable housing, the meaningful work, the community of people who cared about each other, I realized he was right. We had done something good, and we were just getting started. If you want to keep hearing stories like this, tap the red button that says subscribe. It's free, and it helps me keep sharing these moments that remind us what it means to be human. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest changes, but more than that, they remind us who we're capable of being, even in our darkest moments, especially in our darkest moments.